This sweet treat can be found almost in any country across the world. It's a combination of using leftover ingredients with some dairy products and topped with something sweet. It can be enjoyed with your favorite fruit or even a little bit of whipped cream. Its original recipe goes as far back as the 1st century. We're exploring the history and origins of French toast. I'm your host, Glenn Warren, and welcome to another serving of Seasons Eatings, the podcast which explores the history and origins of your favorite Christmas foods. Seasons Eatings can be found wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Seasons Eatings is also found on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Blue Sky. If you love the show, then I humbly ask you to share this podcast with someone you think who would love to hear more about the history of Christmas and the foods that shape the holiday we love so much. If you want to give me suggestions for future episodes, just email me at seasonseatingspodcast@gmail.com. All the links can be found in the show notes at seasonseatingspodcast.com. Now, I'm going to change it up a little bit for this episode because usually I explore the history of a food from a certain region. But this dish, French toast, has been created far back as Roman times and just been spread across the world. And of course, who doesn't love getting up Christmas morning and enjoying a nice big platter full, piled high of bread soaked in milk, topped with a little bit of sugar or honey, or even a little bit of maple syrup or whipped cream and your favorite fruit. Now, some authors consider the recipe for aliter dulcia, translated as another sweet dish, included in the Apicius, which is basically a reference book of recipes for people from the 1st century in ancient Rome. Apicius is also known as the De Re Culinaria or De Re Coquinaria, which translates to On the Subject of Cooking, and it's a collection of Roman cookery recipes, which may have been compiled in the 5th century or earlier. The book has been attributed to otherwise unknown Caelius Apicius, an invention based on the fact that one of the two manuscripts is headed with the words Apicae, or rather, because a few recipes are attributed to Apicius in the text. It's also been attributed to Marcus Gavius Apicius, a Roman gourmet who lived sometime in the 1st century during the reign of Tiberius. But the book also may have been authored by a number of different Roman cooks from the 1st century. And again, it's not uncommon for someone of stature to put their name on a book and have basically people research recipes for him or her and just take the credit basically for the whole thing. So this recipe for French toast is found in Book 7, Recipe 296. And it's a fairly basic, straightforward recipe. You basically take stale bread, dip them in milk and beaten eggs, and fry in oil, and then drizzle with a little bit of honey before serving. And as an aside, dulcia is just the Latin verb for sweet, and where we get the Italian word dulce, meaning sweet. And moving forward in history, we get to the Middle Ages. And in France in the Middle Ages, there was a dish called pain perdu, meaning basically lost bread. During the Middle Ages, Christmas was a grand celebration, as I've talked about before. It marked 12 days of feasting from December 25th to January 6th, ending with Epiphany. And unlike today, where Christmas is often centered around gift giving, the medieval holiday season was a time of religious observance, communal feasts, and winter festivities. And then wealthy households obviously the king and others, threw lavish Christmas feasts, often featuring roast meats, pies, spiced drinks, and white bread, which actually is a luxury at the time because it would actually take a lot of time to refine the bread and remove the germ from the wheat and the chaff. And it was served as a source of luxury and abundance, but without preservatives, white bread went stale fairly quickly. So, in order to repurpose all this white bread, they created French toast, or pain perdu. Eggs and milk were common. Everyone had cows and chickens, so soaking the bread and frying it produced a rich and filling dish, ideal for sustaining people during those cold winter months. And medieval people believe that spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and clove actually had warming properties, so they would add these spices to the dishes, making them popular during the winter months. And sugar was super expensive. It was only available to the ultra rich. It would be traded along the spice trail, basically from Asia to Europe. And as I've talked about with Dr. Neil Buttery in his book, The Dark History of Sugar, sugar kind of started around Persia and that area, and then moved slowly westward into Europe. So people who didn't have sugar would use honey or fruit to sweeten dishes like pain perdu. And some even wealthier households would drizzle their French toast with rose water or a saffron-infused syrup. And again, considered a luxury at the time, because if you had servants to tend gardens and grow these plants, then you could afford to lavish your guests with these fragrances. During the Christmas season, many medieval people observed periods of fasting, where meat and rich foods were restricted. Simple dishes like a pain perdu may have been eaten during these times, particularly on Christmas Eve or Epiphany morning. Monasteries, for example, played a role in keeping food traditions alive. Many monks would bake bread and were known for making nourishing dishes that later became traditional. It's possible that French toast variations were served in monasteries to use up leftover bread during the Christmas feasts. And Christmas in the Middle Ages just wasn't about the home feasts. It was also about celebrating in the open-air markets and town fairs, where vendors sold their wares. And in some places, vendors would have fried or grilled bread similar to French toast, and it was sold as an affordable winter snack. And it was often paired with wassail. And if you've listened to my episode about eggnog, there was a version of eggnog which you put in a little bit of bread on top, so it actually soaked up the nog and created like this sort of thick bread soup. Bread actually becomes one of the main, ingredients of a Christmas feast, because Christmas Day you'd be served roasted meats. You'd have boar, goose, swan, venison, meat pies, spiced wine, and bread was served in abundance, basically mostly as serving vessels. It would be called a trencher. So you get these slices of thick, stale bread and use them as edible plates. It would soak up all the juices and the gravies that all the dishes would have. Also during Twelfth Night, you would have another day of feasting and using bread as a sweet treat and made into pain perdu. Bread was basically a fundamental part of a medieval diet, and unfortunately it wasn't as refined as we know it today. Bread is ground wheat using a stone, basically two stones rubbed together, and the wheat would go in between. And so the process of grinding down on this wheat, you would actually get bits of stone in the bread. So a lot of medieval people had very ground down teeth. So because they've been chewing on this really tough bread with stones in it. And of course, France wasn't the only place to make French toast or pain perdu. In England, there was a similar dish called the Poor Knights of Windsor. But it was similar to French toast, but the bread was soaked in wine instead of milk. In Spain, you have tortillas, which is especially popular during Christmas, soaked in milk or wine and coated with a cinnamon sugar or honey. And in Italy, you actually had pan dorato, which is made with a sweet wine and served during Christmas feasts, for example. So we find examples of this dish in recipe books. One I've talked about many times before in the form of curry, which was a recipe book for the Henry VIII, I think, if I remember correctly. This is from the 14th century, and it basically instructs the cooks to soak bread in a mixture of eggs and milk, fry it, and serve it with sugar. Very simple. Another recipe is from about the 1300s in France, called Le Viandier from Guillaume Tirel. And this is a culinary text which includes a recipe for toasté doré, which involves soaking bread in a mixture of beaten eggs and sugar and then frying it, and it's clear precursor to our modern day French toast. Another one from from Spain. This is from 1611. In Francesco Martinez Motinho's Arte de Cocina, and this Spanish cookbook features a recipe for tortillas where bread is soaked in milk or wine and then fried and then sweetened with honey and sugar. And tortillas are traditionally associated with Christmas in Spain. So it makes sense for traditions that have been born in Europe to make their way across to the Americas. So we'll talk about one of the dishes that was created in Europe but made its way to America after the break.
Do you long for those casual Friday nights spent in on the couch, cuddled up with a blanket, maybe some delivery pizza without a care in the world? Then I have the podcast for you. Hey, I am Matt, and I am the host of TGI Podcast. As a product of the 1990s, I want to go back and take a look at all of the classic TGIF shows, as well as many other classic sitcoms from that era, to determine if they truly are a holiday classic. We've got you covered with Halloween and Thanksgiving in the fall before we go full steam ahead with Christmas in December. Come give us a listen if you want to take a trip down 90s Nostalgia Lane.
What's up, dudes? I'm Jerry D of Totally Rad Christmas, the podcast that talks all things Christmas in the 80s. Toys, movies, specials, music, books, fashion, and fads.
If it was gnarly during Christmas in the 80s, he's got it covered. Wait, is there a lot of things to talk about for the 80s and Christmas?
Well, you got the movie giants like Christmas Vacation, Scrooged, and A Christmas Story. There are TV specials like Muppet Family Christmas, Claymation Christmas Celebration, and a Garfield Christmas special.
Plus classics shown every year.
You also jam out to Last Christmas, Do They Know It's Christmas, and Christmas in Hollis. But most of all, it was a time for the most bodacious, best-selling Christmas toys ever, like He-Man, G.I. Joe, Transformers,
and Cabbage Patch Kids.
Yes, them too. We cover them all, plus much more, including standard segments like Hap Hap Happiest Memory, Gag Me with the Spoon, The Other Half of the Battle,
and Chant with the Littles.
So tune in to Totally Rad Christmas everywhere you get your podcasts. Turn the clock back and dive into those warm and fuzzy memories.
Later, dudes.
One dish that made its way from Europe to South America specifically comes from Portugal, and that is the rabanada. A rabanada is a typical sweet from the Festa da Cançoeira, a traditional Portuguese Christmas Eve dinner. Rabanadas began centuries ago in the midst of the Catholic holiday in Lent, of all places. Since many gave up meat, Portuguese Catholics found themselves eating more bread. As a result, habanadas were born from an effort to preserve and make use of all the bread, stale and fresh alike. Habanadas have its origins in medieval Portugal. Habanadas date back to at least the 15th or 16th century, with their origins linked to medieval Iberian cuisine. Similar to pain perdu or tortillas, they're a practical way of using up stale bread, a valuable staple in medieval households. In Portugal, milk and wine are common ingredients, and it wasn't unusual for bread to be soaked in them before frying, enhancing the flavor and making it richer. Habanadas became strongly associated with Christmas in Portugal. Why? Because they're a simple, affordable, and festive dessert, perfect for large gatherings. And Portugal already has a tradition of serving sweet fried breads at Christmas, like filjos, which is a fried dough, and sonhos, which are little fritters. Habanadas fit right into this category. And of course, the wine-soaked versions are particularly popular in the northern regions of Portugal. And bread and wine are essential to especially a Catholic Christmas tradition, making habanadas a fitting dish for a religious holiday. And since Christmas Eve is usually a fasting day, that means many traditional sweets were eaten right after the midnight feast to give you that quick boost of energy with the carbs and sugar. And because it's made from leftover bread, it's easy to make in large batches and sharing with guests and neighbors and friends and family. So eventually the Portuguese make their way over to South America to Brazil. And while the Brazilian habanadas are a little bit different than the Portuguese version, the most obvious difference is that the Brazilian version is made with sweetened condensed milk, making this an even sweeter, richer treat. Habanadas have a few significant differences when compared to American French toast. The first is a type of bread that's used. American French toast favors a thicker sliced bread, usually a soft white bread such as challah, a sourdough, or even a brioche. Most recipes agree it's best to use the bread that's at least 1 day old. Habanadas actually use a crusty French bread, or a baguette that's been out for no more than 24 hours. Using a baguette is preferable since the slices are smaller, making them more manageable for the fryer. And the custard of the habanadas is also a little bit different. American French toast uses a mixture of eggs, sugar or honey, milk or cream, and perhaps a little bit of cinnamon and nutmeg. Habanadas adds sweetened condensed milk to the custard for an even more decadent taste and creamier inner texture. The mixture is then warmed over medium heat and the eggs are kept separate, used only to briefly coat the bread before deep frying. American French toast is usually pan-fried in butter or oil and then served with a maple syrup or even fresh fruit or preserves. By contrast, habanadas are deep fried in oil and then rolled in cinnamon sugar. Similar to a churro, if you've had one, they're deep fried, but the batter is piped into a hot oil and then they're rolled in a cinnamon sugar. And you can drizzle honey on top if you desire, but it's fairly sweet on its own. It's a fact that the Portuguese were responsible for bringing the recipe to habanadas to Brazil, which quickly spread and took over Christmas. Even though it's lost ground now to a panettone, for example, habanadas is still widely made in several states, with the Northeast being the largest consumer. The name fatia de parida, a type of bread, comes from a story that tells of the help this Christmas sweet gave in the production of breast milk during pregnancy, and for this reason it was always offered and consumed by pregnant women. The recipe in itself is fairly straightforward. So you take a fresh baguette, or a less than a day old baguette, cut into pieces into 1 centimeter slices, or about 1/2 inch slices. Put milk on the stove, put a little bit of sugar in that, dissolve the sugar into the milk, and then in a separate bowl you beat your eggs. So you just break up the yolks and mix in the egg yolks and whites together. Now dip the bread into the milk mixture of milk and sugar and take it out and soak just a few pieces at a time, and then squeeze out the excess milk. You don't want your bread to be sopping with milk. Then dip the soaked slices of bread into the egg and then into the hot oil. Now you only want to do 2 or 3 pieces at a time, because again, you'll have a lot of space. You'll have a lot of product to take up valuable space in the frying pan. Or also, you don't want any milk to cause a lot of spatter with the hot oil. Then you take the fried pieces, put them on a towel to drain out the excess oil, sprinkle with a little bit of cinnamon sugar, and then store at room temperature and serve. And that's what makes habaneras the perfect Christmas dish. It's considered a symbol of abundance and warmth, making them a great holiday staple. Their connection to Christian symbolism, the mixture of bread and wine, and generosity and festive gatherings make them the perfect fit for the holiday season. And today they can be served any time of the year, but in Brazil they continue to be enjoyed just at Christmas time, along other great Portuguese desserts. And while French toast in general has been used as a practical dish for using stale leftover bread, habaneras became a special Christmas treat in Portugal and Brazil. And from ancient Rome to our holiday breakfast tables today, French toast has traveled through time and across cultures, making its mark on Christmas traditions. Whether you're enjoying it with syrup, cinnamon, or even a festive eggnog twist, it's a delicious reminder how a simple, humble food can bring warmth to our holiday celebrations. I'm Glenn Warren, and thank you for listening to this serving of Seasons Eatings. Seasons Eatings is available wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Please, if you can leave a review about the show so we can spread the Christmas cheer. If you let me know you've left a review, I'll send you a Seasons Eating sticker as a personal thank you. Also, I would love to hear from you. Send me an email at seasonseatingspodcast@gmail.com and let me know how you like the show, suggestions for future episodes, or just to say hi. And I know we all get busy, so even sharing the podcast with someone who loves Christmas would be a great help. And if you're feeling extra generous this season, you can buy me an eggnog. Head on over to seasonseatingspodcast.com and click on the little cup in the corner. Each small donation helps with the daily running of the podcast and is greatly appreciated. Also, Seasoned Eatings has some great merch. Again, click on the merch tab at seasonseatingpodcast.com to find your next great gift. All music for Seasons Eatings is used under the Creative Commons license.